But the dean, I don't think is going to be able.
We are now live streaming on YouTube.
I shouldn't say all this. Okay. Should we begin there? Is it 11 or should we take another minute or so?
Another minute or so?
Another minute or so, okay.
It's like, yeah,
Just a couple of I think Dr. Khawas has joined. Our coordinators are all here. Professor Parthasarathi is also here.
he's here.
Some of our resource persons are here, I think.
Yeah.
Or you added them only.
Thank you.
Yeah,
These are showing only because you added them or they have
No, they have joined.
they have joined and
They have been allowed.
participants 60. One person is being.
actually,
12 o'clock. 7:55, 12. Huh?
So among everybody, we are the only ones with the real tea and snacks.
This all has to be virtually served to the guests. And
Muthuramaliyam should have asked.
I think
I thought he saw
Totally
Dr.
must have been.
Prithviram. No? Can you not mute us now?
no, you're not muted.
No, you can mute us when we are talking.
Hi, Janardhan.
Good morning to all of you. I think it's 11, so with your permission, we will start now.
Yes.
It gives me great pleasure to welcome all of you for this inaugural address by Professor Chenoy. A warm welcome to all our resource persons, to the distinguished speaker, Professor Chenoy, to all the coordinators who have joined us, to the head of the department, Political Science, and dear colleagues and students, and many others. This inaugural address is going to be the first part of the preparatory webinar for the MA in Human Security that is due to be launched in June 2021 under the Institution of Eminence scheme of the University of Hyderabad. Swagatam, the Telugu and Sanskrit term for welcome, literally means coming into one's own. And you would agree with me that there is no better way of coming into one's own than by grappling with the human condition and the insecurities that are confronting us all over the place today. Hannah Arendt, a distinguished 20th century philosopher, encapsulated the three most important aspects of the human condition as constituted by labor and work, which deal with the realm of necessity, and what she called action, that deals with the realm of public political activity. In all these areas, you would agree with me that we are confronted by great vulnerabilities today, thanks to threats that are emanating from the social and political system on the one hand, and from physical and organic systems as the UN document puts it, and the freedom to live in dignity are still unfinished projects and will remain so, calling for fresh thinking and innovative ideas. Human security for us is not a distinctive field or a unique method as much as a direction and a directive to orient us, to reorient us rather, to knowledge and capacity building that is multidisciplinary. You would also agree with me that no single department or discipline is able to deal with the kinds of issues which confront us today, whether it be the environmental crisis, violence against women, or cultural and communal conflicts stemming from securing memories and the inability to secure cultures. These concerns, although we know that there are conversations happening across disciplines, some of us began to feel that the way we were teaching and researching tended to be more inward looking rather than outward looking, and that we now need to, as we do periodically, we now need to reorient the existing knowledge to problems that require multidisciplinary effort. Apart from this, the fact that most of our students tended to see what they learn in different disciplines and departments as somehow insulated from other knowledges that they get from other departments also was a cause of concern for us. There were many other concerns that started some of us on this journey, and we found that human security, both as an idea and as a directive to look at our existential dilemmas, was a very attractive choice for us. We looked at some of the international programs in LSE, which are actually very bold and innovative. For instance, LSE has an MSc on something called social innovation and entrepreneurship. We also found that Fletcher's and the University of Tokyo also have programs which are oriented to human security. So encouraged by the international programs and encouraged also by the promise that we found in the way human security has been fleshed out, both within scholarship in international studies, but also in scholarship in other disciplines, we ventured into this area. This is going to be a multi-departmental effort from the School of Social Sciences. As of now, we have 3 departments which have joined together to think about courses. The MA will be in operation for 4 years initially under the Institution of M&M scheme. It will admit 20 students per year. It will leverage the existing expertise in different departments, but also, like I said, expand our horizons to float innovative programs. The current thinking, especially after we saw the new education policy document, is that a 1-year program might be an attractive offering, but we do need many approvals to come in place, and we are awaiting the same. So this preparatory webinar, many of you have received the preparatory document with some of the course outlines and with some of the tentative templates that we are considering. So this webinar, we hope, will encourage and inspire us and nudge us to further deepen the scope of the program and come out with a concrete program by, say, February or March 2021. With those few words, I'm happy to once again welcome you all with a few reminders. Our Vice Chancellor will join us anytime soon during the course of the next 1 hour. Both the VC and the Dean are busy with an IOE meeting. The governing body is meeting to discuss many other programs, but also this program is being tabled. Our HOD, Professor Suan Housing, is already there. And so I would request him now to say a few words about the department, which will be followed by Dr. Sneha introducing the speaker, and then we will proceed to the inaugural address by Professor Chennai. So Swagatam again. Thank you. Professor Suan.
Yeah, thank you, Professor Vasanti, for that very useful introduction to the MA in Human Security program. As some of you would be aware, the initial uh, years would be hosted by the Department of Political Science, of course, in concert with other departments in the School of Social Science. We look forward to uh, inaugurating as well as launching this program in the spirit of federalism, which, as a student of federal studies, I earnestly believe that this is something that we could, as joint endeavor, promote and leverage in which promote a sense of shared responsibilities across departments in ways which make the program more interactive and meaningful, so that the expertise across departments in the School of Social Science would be harnessed in ways which make the program attractive and meaningful for students applying and intending to be admitted in this course. I also congratulate the team which has been working very hard for this preparatory webinar. Professor Vasanti has been playing a very important as well as steering role in formulating some of the initial thoughts, ideas into the making of this program. I also thank the very supportive colleagues who rendered their expertise, Dr. Sneha, Dr. Bhim, Dr. Biju, who have been playing very important roles in formulating as well as coordinating this program so that we are able to see the current form. We also thank the other departments who have rendered their expertise as well as service in the formulation of this program. We look forward to having the expertise not only within the school but also from outside the university system, so that this can in fact become a space of fruitful intellectual as well as academic exchange of idea, because the very program itself demands that the base of interdisciplinary insights and expertise come into play in order to make this program more attractive as well as meaningful. I look forward to this seminar. Thanks to the eminent speaker today, Professor Chenoy, who has agreed to deliver the keynote address. And thank you for participating for this seminar. I wish all success to the organizing team as well as the participant, that we will be having a very meaningful and productive intellectual as well as academic discussion. Thank you so much, and all the best for the rest of the program. Over to you, Professor Vasanti.
And he's also part of the political science subcommittee working on this. I think he's there on the screen. All right, Dr. Sneha.
Yeah. It is a great honor for me to have the opportunity to welcome Professor Anuradha Chenoy as the keynote speaker and to be able to introduce her. She's a retired professor from Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi, where she had an illustrious career at the Center for Russian and Central Asian Studies. And she also acted as the Dean of the School of International Studies. She's the author of several books and numerous papers in the areas of security studies, development studies, and gender studies. She has held consultancies with various important international organizations, including the International Committee of the Red Cross, UNESCO, UN Women, and the UN Peacekeepers. Currently, she is involved with the work of a network of civil society initiatives and social movements called the Asia-Europe People's Forum. She continues to write extensively in academic publications as well as newspaper and media platforms on international relations, gender, and other social issues. Among her several books, in the context of the webinar today, her book, which she co-authored with Shehrbano Tajbakhsh, titled Human Security, Concepts and Implications, is particularly noteworthy. It is a very widely read, discussed, and cited book. It was, in fact, my introduction to the idea of human security. And also it has been my privilege to be her student. She offered this fascinating course on gender and international relations in the School of International Studies at JNU, which has been very formative in my own work. And I'm delighted to be able to welcome my teacher, Professor Anuradha Chenoy, and to invite her to deliver the keynote address titled Human Security, the Need for a Paradigm Shift in India. Professor Chenoy.
Over to you, Professor Chenoy.
Thank you. Professor Vasanthi Srinivasan, Professor Housing, Sneha, colleagues, students, and friends. I'm deeply honored to give this address at the start of this extremely important program and, in fact, degree program on human security studies being initiated by the University of Hyderabad, a city which I love personally. I will speak on human security, the need for a paradigm shift, and why it is so relevant in India, in South Asia, and in the third world, actually. Now, worldwide, across gender, class, caste, community, the major concern of governments and people alike in our recent times has been the COVID-19 pandemic and the following economic recession characterized by unemployment and inequalities. Many leaders tried to blame the pandemic on another country, rush production of the vaccine to a politically expedient date, imposed lockdowns, and yet millions have been sick, hundreds of thousands lives lost. In the US, for example, more lives have been lost to this pandemic than during the Vietnam War and all other wars that followed. So more than ever, the traditional conception of security, that is a realist paradigm, that seeks security with military means, have had to shift somewhat and concentrate on the safety of people and communities from disease. Now, this exponential shift actually just indicates the idea of human security. Now, even with this experience, the issue is, will states and their realist theorists still privilege national security and place other existential threats just as problems of soft power and ignore human security? But the point, my first point really is that human security is not soft power, because soft power is used to influence the behavior of others, whereas human security is to do with people's well-being. Commonly defined in the first report on human security, it was defined as freedom from want and freedom from fear. So therefore, the question is, have regimes and leaders really shifted their attention to human security? These are some of my introductory remarks. Why human security is so important and why policymakers need to shift their attention to the human security paradigm, and why it is up to departments like yours to make this narrative popular amongst people, amongst students, amongst academics, amongst intellectuals, and in the wider public. Now, analysis, statistics, visuals, evidence, and anecdotes, I think, which all of you would have seen, really tell us that the international system is embedded currently in multiple traps. Now, I'll count some, for example. 1, the pandemic and health crisis, where internationally, governments have not been able to deliver health security to citizens. 2, economic recession and unemployment, widening social inequalities. Here too, governments across the world, you do a comparative politics analysis, they have not been able to match the aspirations of people, leading to polarization of societies. 3, climate change and ecological disasters. Witness, for example, the huge fires ranging in the US, in Australia, in Africa, that have destroyed millions of acres of forests and wildlife, floods and droughts, annihilation of species and more. Fourth trap, and amongst the multiple traps, anxiety and distress of people that is leading to large protest movements and fragmentation of societies.
Yes.
5, the response of states to curb these aspirations often is either to blame some other, either outsiders or some other community, to suppress dissent, to increase centralization of power. And all this is often backed up by corporate governance. 6, in many countries, even as the pandemic has raged, civil wars, regional conflict, enhancement of threat perception, aggression on borders, enhanced military and nuclear expenditures have continued to grow. Therefore, my very first argument says that the case for human security at this conjuncture is so clear and necessary for planetary survival itself. My argument is that traditional security is no longer sufficient to handle these threats. Further, the paradigm or framework of traditional security reflects primarily the dominant or hegemonic narratives and race for great power or even regional power status, which is detrimental both for citizens and ultimately even the state of these so-called great powers or regional powers as to the rest of the world. Further, human security and non-traditional security are especially beneficial to people and states need to realize that, especially states like India and others in the third world. My critique of realist theory matches with the critique of many. That is, realist theory, realism, which dominates international security conversations, books, complexes, is a voice of hegemony. This narrative claims to be scientific. It is based on the assumption that state behavior is chaotic, anarchic in the international system. Remember Morgenthau and Waltz, etc., who talked about the state of anarchy in the international system, and they're right, that because international laws cannot be enforced, but they say it is not norm-based. But from the human security point of view, the human security analysts argue, for example, that if there can be hundreds of rules which just regulate, for example, just the music industry, and hundreds of rules that regulate the pharmaceutical industry and patents, where any person who listens to music or each person who takes a drug, the patents and the profits will go according to these rules and WTO norms. Why can't there be rules for other aspects of state behavior? If there can be so many rules and so well regulated for profits for corporates. And I just gave these 2 examples, and there are hundreds of examples. So to say that, the international system is anarchic and we cannot regulate it is really something of a misnomer. Because this leads me to my second interlinked critique on realist theory and the dominant security paradigm. Because if you ask, who has this lack of rules, lack of norms really assisted in international politics? Did this anarchy in the international system not benefit the colonizers, the colonial states, those who colonized and had colonial empires? They benefited from this anarchy and made rules for states that they governed. Does it not benefit the superpowers and their zones of influence of where they can intervene when they want? So this lack of international law benefits a certain group, and therefore they're not equally interested in developing this kind of international law to regulate state system, or even further heighten a democratic multilateral system, whether it's a United Nations, etc. You can see India and others' argument to broaden the Security Council, how outdated it is. These are human security issues, actually. They're saying broaden it because it should be democratic. It should reflect the current world. But the superpowers are not interested in having those norms. And that is why all of us need to challenge the traditional realist theories. The other thing that realists argue and they claim is that realism and traditional security is scientific and therefore not normative. Now, this claim, I believe, is extraordinarily short-sighted because science has never claimed to be unethical or without norms. Can you imagine medical science can even exist without ethics and norms? What is the Hippocratic Oath, for example? All scientific theories always say that science is not an ideology. It is based on fact and evidence, and it is self-correcting. So it's, you know, and realism really cannot claim that they are the only scientific and non-normative. Now, human security's objective is, of course, humanitarian and rights-based. It is holistic, it is interconnected. That is, it brings in different fields like political economy, the study of society, and others. And that is why it is wonderful that the human security course that you have designed in Hyderabad University has understood and has incorporated this interdisciplinary methodology. Further, human security also identifies with policy making, and it is flexible and inclusive. Now, human security builds on many earlier normative works on security, like peace studies, like the works of Johan Galtung, common security, discussed by the Olof Palme Commission of 1982, comprehensive security that included non-military threats, the Human Development Reports by the UNDP, even on feminist ideas of security that showed realism is biased as it is based on the experience of men and structures of institutional patriarchy and race domination, and is exclusive of women and minority ideas. In other words, what we are arguing and what you're going to be showing in your course is that there are two main parallel paradigms. Of course, within these paradigms, there are sub-paradigms, sub-narratives, different conversations, theories, etc. But broadly, just as an introduction, I think we can stick with the two broad paradigms of framework. On the one hand, the traditional security or state-centered security, which includes realists, neo-realists, constructivists, and others, versus, or rather the second alternative is a non-traditional security paradigm, which includes primarily the human security, but it also includes feminists, critical thinkers, and several others like the neo-colonialists, etc. Now, what is it that is different than human security? And I raise some traditional questions here to understand what is human security and what are its referents. Now, the referent of security in the state-centered paradigm is the state itself. So it's very statist, because for them, state security is primary and security for the individual or citizens or community trickles down from the state. Whereas in the human security paradigm, individual or citizen security or community security is an equally important referent. That is to say that human security does not come at the cost of national security, but it says that it should be equally prioritized. There should be a good balance between national security and human security. Because the argument is, and it is proven in fact, and I'll give you some examples, is that traditional security gets so obsessed with state security or regime security sometimes. Regimes are shown to be the mainstay of the state, that it comes at a cost to the citizens. See, for example, the story of the Syrian and Assad regime. The security of the Assad regime became so important that the security of people was totally forgotten, and they were so marginalized, and it's become a failed state. Similarly, North Korea and many others. That is the essence of human security.
Office is saying that he's not able to join.
That human security must be part of the national security paradigms also, and not just as soft power, but as a theme of themselves. Second, state security values sovereignty, territory, national independence. Human security also says that, yes, of course, sovereignty, territory, national independence is important, but you cannot go on harping on these. You also have to prioritize bodily security, protection from threats and basic needs, personal freedoms, human and economic rights, social and economic rights. Now, does this come at the cost of sovereignty or independence? No, it is an essential part of it. It should not be neglected. It is the right balance that matters. Now, then, state security or state-centered or traditional security paradigms see threats as those from directly organized violence from other states. Now, again, you can see the hole in this. If the threat to the state is only from another state, which earlier traditional theorists like Morgenthau and others argued, then how is it that the Soviet Union collapsed despite all the safeguards they took against threats from other states? This is precisely the lack of understanding of realist frameworks and why they could not predict that the Soviet Union would collapse, because it neglected human security, it neglected federalism, it neglected what the states and people were saying. So while human security sees threats from both direct and indirect sources, but it also sees threats from the structure of power itself, from relations of power, from global political economy, from direct and indirect violence, from dehumanization, from disease, violent conflicts, underdevelopment, issues of migration, from environmental risks, poverty, inequality, etc. All these matter, and the state has to decide and work with civil society, with academics, to see what are the threats. And recently, these threats have been broadened. Even a state like Russia, I can give you that example because I study it closely, or China, they say their main threat today is demographic decline. It's not a threat which comes even from the USA or any other power. So that's an understanding. It's a step towards human security. My next point is that state-centric paradigms see the means of security primarily as force and military backed, and also with soft power for creating legitimacy through nationalisms and culture, etc. Whereas human security, it does not ignore these, but it adds. And in fact, it says prioritize, bring to the same level the means of security as human development, law, governance, justice, peace, social harmony, inter-community harmony, etc. So you can see how human security is not overthrowing national security or the traditional security, but it's really challenging it, because traditional security focused far too much just on the state without seeing the components of who makes the state: citizens, people, communities, groups, minorities, people who are different. The law of nature is there's difference, there's change, but traditional security did not recognize this. Then what are the threat perceptions of security? That is, security from what? Traditional realists perceive threats from other states and also now from some non-state actors. You know, after 9/11, they reorganized that theory, especially the neo-realists from Waltz onwards, and said terrorism, cyber attacks, threats from non-state actors. But these are often either linked to enemy states or to the internal enemy others. This paradigm, I believe, and I think you would too as you do this course, is somewhat clumsy in accommodating threats from ethnic and identity politics, from sectarian and fundamentalist impositions, from majoritarianism, etc. And often it dubs these as terrorism instead of looking at root causes. So human security, or they see it as a domestic security. And, you know, realist theory and those who study geopolitics in the traditional security paradigms, they often just do not look at domestic issues. Whereas human security, feminist studies, they see the interlinkages. They say you cannot dislink the domestic from the external. Of course, and human security considers threats from climate change, environmental degradation, human rights, all as equally important threats. Of course, now, because human security brings in these threats, there was an entire huge debate led by Barry Buzan, who said, how much can you broaden security after all? If you bring in everything, if you bring in health and environment, and the other argument they made against this was that why are you securitizing everything, like securitizing health and environment and poverty? But just look at the last few months. Look within and outside yourselves, and you'll see that historical evidence has justified human security. And the pandemic is the biggest example, and the post-pandemic world is going to establish this even more. So once again, I cannot just resist congratulating you for bringing this in. It's a move which was much required, but I would say that you're much ahead of the universities in all of South Asia and even most in Asia to having introduced this course. The next question then is the issue of security by what means? Of course, the traditional security analysts did security by the means of power, military alliances like NATO, SEATO, CENTO, also by diplomacy, by deterrence, which has been disproved, that no matter how many nuclear weapons you have, you cannot deter the collapse of your state. And the Soviet Union was an example, as were many other countries. Multilateralism, etc. Human security, in contrast, also argues that ensuring rights, human development, engagement, and equal cooperation, diplomacy and negotiation, as opposed to just intervention, but you need to have dialogue, rule of law, strengthening of international law in order to strengthen international security. Now, I'll get on to my last few points, because at this transition, in this international transition from the old bipolar and then multipolar world arguments of geopolitics and this talk of the new Cold War, you would see that there are many sub-narratives within these two main narratives which I have talked about. The state narrative, the traditional security narrative, also has a resource power hegemony and its interests, which are revealed by the reproduction of increasing inequality, economic and social crisis, and the shift to the right, backed by a power elite and finance capital. Another sub-narrative and a popular discourse is a polar opposite of this, which comes from the politics of violent and intolerant opposition. Now, we have to watch out for that. Human security safeguards against that. This takes the form of rising fundamentalist, sectarian, politicized identity and religious movements. In other instances, groups seeking to speak on behalf of the poor and marginalized, but basing themselves on ethnic and identity movements. Now, all these have common characteristics. They believe in force. They're embedded in a culture of violence. They cannot tolerate the other. They have no empathy for people who are powerless. They enforce their ideas as the only valid ones. They reject pluralism. And they have a means for an illusionary end which seeks to capture power. Human security challenges these. They challenge both these narratives. They challenge the state narrative, but they accommodate some aspects of state narrative, but they challenge any narrative of violence. And they argue instead for sustainable development and people's security in a universal rights framework through inclusive institutions. And that is why I see so many women here. The reason we are all here is precisely because of these struggles that women launched, the feminist movements, the security movements, that we should be part of security paradigms based on secular, plural, federal, accountable, and transparent institutions. The reasoning of human security is based on a diverse amalgamation of feminist, critical, liberal, left, right, justice theorists. Of course, all these theorists also have a critique of human security, and human security argues back and often accommodates some of these critiques, and that is why it is very flexible. So really, and some people would argue, how can you use human security for geopolitics or for geostrategy or for conflict resolution, for understanding conflict? But human security is an excellent framework, I would argue, for that, because it is for early mediation, for communities who have lived in past together and continue to do so, for new reconciliation methods for communities that develop differences and points of conflagration appear, like the creation of the other, the attempts to dishonor by making out women's bodies as objects for dishonoring through sexual violence. Now the alternate to this can only come by knowing and engaging with local communities and having channels open to them. Gabriel Rifkin, I use a quote from him. He spoke on alternatives to military intervention, to military policing, by saying we need actually a team of mediators. I wouldn't like to use the word commando because that is again militarist language. The military has a role and it should stay, and civilian issues should remain civilian. But I would, in the end, as my last point, say that traditional security is extremely powerful because it created a military, industrial, media, academic complex. There was not just a state complex, it also had media and academic within it, and which was creating this consensus continuously in foreign policy around security and national security issues, and speaking in one voice. And it created a kind of authoritarian position in foreign policy. But I believe that human security and what you are doing in Hyderabad University is bringing in a much needed idea into the public domain, an idea of human security whose time has come, without which we will live under circumstances of an existential threat. I wish to congratulate Professor Vasanti, Sneha, Professor Kham Khan, your entire team, your department, and your university for having backing you in developing this course. I looked at the 2-day seminar. It really reflects what this course is going to be about. It's got eminent speakers from the field of law, of domestic violence, of regional development, from economics, from people who have read from Suhas Palsikar to Kalpana Kanabiran and others who have been guiding lights in our discourse. I wish to congratulate you again, Hyderabad University, to your Department of Political Science, and wish the Department of Human Security the best in this endeavor. Thank you very much.
Yeah.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy, for laying out the breadth and depth of this notion of human security as it has been debated in the scholarship, but also as it has been appropriated in different fields of activity as well as advocacy. Usually, keynote addresses don't have question answer sessions, but since we are meeting in a new mode, and since many people have joined us, I thought we could have a short discussion, say for about 5 to 7 minutes, if people want to reflect and comment on this talk. Thank you also, Professor Chenoy, for encouraging us. This is much needed because we tend to be sometimes skeptical given the breadth of this idea, whether we'll be able to do justice. So I open up, the floor is open for discussion. If anyone has any questions or comments, please feel free to ask.
You can unmute.
Yeah, we'll unmute them if anyone is wanting.
They're unmuted.
They can unmute themselves. You can unmute yourself and ask the question. Is someone waiting? I think. Are there any questions or comments?
Can I ask a question?
Welcome, Professor Aruka Parashar Sen, who's from the history department, who used to be in the history department. Yes, all right.
Yeah. No, I was very fascinated with the talk, but there was towards the end, Professor Chenoy raised the whole issue about the question of how should societies handle the question of the other. And I think that this is extremely important, not only in the context of South Asia, but also the world over. So, I mean, this is it's quite central to the entire problematic of human security. How do societies, and you said that we should be looking at it from the perspective of local communities and so on and so forth. But one of the major issues that has arisen out of this pandemic and even before that is the whole negative attitude that we have towards the other. Whereas culturally, as a civilization, as a South Asian civilization, the other was always in dialogue with the self. But now there seems to be a kind of a binary between who we are and who is the other. So maybe just a little response, because you didn't elaborate that part, you mentioned it, but I just thought maybe perhaps you can elaborate on that.
Yeah, I think this is a very critical question, really, and thank you so much for raising it. This is not a new examination. If we read political philosophy, I'd just like to cite a quote from Kant, which stayed in my mind for years. in which he said that we have to live together separately. So there is no such as the other. We are the other also. The other comes because we do not see them as similar to ourselves. So we identify them. There was a point when women were the other, or class and caste were the other. And now another religious minority is another. In the West, the migrant is the other. So the other can continue. The point is to understand, and this comes with the understanding that nature, humanity, human beings, society, and even disciplines are plural. Plurality is not just a political policy or phenomena. There is no society which is homogeneous. Each of us has so many identities. Women always begin with this thing of, I have an identity as a woman, as a mother, as a professional, as a scientist, as a gardener, as a Punjabi, as a Hindu, as a Parsi, as a Muslim. So which other are you going to identify me with as? So we need to really, in this, deconstructionism has played a great role, as has the constructivist theory, in which they have showed that we have to continuously build to show that the other must not be stigmatized. The other will be others, but that doesn't make them inferior or less or different. Difference must be accepted. So there is difference and there is other, but this other is not evil. It's not a threat. We shouldn't see it as a threat in order to mobilize us and homogenize us. And an other is always built on stereotyping. If we see an other, for example, I recently saw this debate in the West where the whole of European Union is talking of the migrant. We don't want this other. But the women identify with women. They're not the other. Many of them would have a similar religion, so they're not the other. They might have come from another country, but so are the Europeans, have many countries and nationalities within them. So really we have to, and human security helps because it brings this into the international debate. Traditional security understanding did not have an understanding of the other. They said this is part of a domestic problem. You won't see it in foreign policy books. You won't see it on books on bilateral relations, but it needs to come in. And that is the role of human security and of showing that the other is us also, that we are also different, and within us also there are others, and others also have difference. There will be difference, but this has to coexist. We have to mediate and understand the other and see the points of difference and point of comparisons and points of similarities also. Thank you.
Read that out.
Yeah, there's one question, I think, on the remarks. This is how can we, this is Mr. Amit Kumar?
Yes, Amit Kumar.
Amit Kumar, how can we strengthen the existing system and international law as we are seeing it's working and totally collapse?
Yes. Yes, I saw this question in the chat. This is again a very good question. And I would argue that, you know, everything like international law has to be backed by states who would benefit from international law, that is the smaller states, who do not want to see intervention, and by civil society, by international movements, by you know, academia, by journalists, all of those who, and by making a public discourse which challenges the discourse which says international law is of no use. India, for example, has been a country which has argued for international law historically. Currently, they have some differences, but I believe these differences should be overcome because international law is necessary for planetary survival.
We can just come here.
So really, yes, you're right. Multilateralism has been weakened. And one of the reasons for this weakening has been because of the corporates and finance capital. For them, profits are so important. Neoliberalism and the reforms of privatization and huge inequality were so beneficial to the small number of finance capital that they felt they can actually work better without international law, but at the same time, they want financial laws to regulate profits. So we need to show that international law is important for global political economy, that inequality is bad for markets, even for profits, and there should be a proper sharing and more equity, more justice. It will actually be beneficial. This has to come from a paradigm shift, from a shift in narratives, which come precisely from these kind of, I wouldn't say trickle down, but really trickle up of conversations and debates and making them as public as possible. There's another question from Anaga Ingol, which I can see in the chat box. Sure. Which said that I would like to know your reflections on the relations between human rights and economic fairness. I ask this in the context of a book by Samuel Moyn, which argues that the breach of political rights and unprecedented focus on human rights has dampened the emphasis and commitment to economic fairness further. I think, Anaga, I don't really agree with this book because economic fairness itself is based on social and economic rights. So if you go really back to the very formation of the ECOSOC, that is the Economic and Social Committee of the United Nations, they said that you cannot really have human rights without economic rights. But I would say the reverse is also true, that you cannot have economic fairness if you do not have human rights. If you suppress the Dalit community, for example, how are you giving them fair economic rights? You're suppressing an entire talent of a community. What would the world be without women today? Women at the forefront of everything. Just a century ago, they were not there on these panels. They were not scientists. They struggled for it. So social, economic, and all these different rights come together. They're interlinked. I think Professor Moyn needs to do some rethinking on this, really. Thanks.
Yeah.
And may I now request Dr. Sneha Banerjee to deliver a vote of thanks.
Thank you, Professor Chenoy. I think we should go back to the previous arrangement. Am I audible now? Yeah, okay. Thank you so much, Professor Chenoy, for this very illuminating keynote address. And
Unmute.
no, I don't have to unmute. This is fine. Yeah. using the video of the larger thing and my mic.
Yeah.
Yeah, this is fine. So thank you, Professor Chenoy, for starting off with a reflection on the contemporary moment, and then also really delving deep into the theoretical foundations of human security and flagging out all of the very, very, very pertinent issues. What are the so for example, when we talk about the ideas of human security and transposing it as yet another side of traditional security, thank you really for pointing out its role as the challenger. So we are very excited to have a vote of confidence from you on this, and we are very excited to be exploring this idea further, and all of the participants who are here, some of them would be joining us for the larger discussion sessions also, and we are immensely looking forward to it. I'm very humbled to be able to deliver the vote of thanks for this. First of all, I would like to thank the Vice Chancellor of the University of Hyderabad, Professor Apparao Podile, for facilitating this webinar and this program, the idea of this program. The director of the Institute of Eminence, Professor Pramod Nair, and the directorate for agreeing to sanction the budget and to table our proposals. I would like to thank the Dean of School of Social Sciences, Professor Arun Patnaik, also for his facilitation of this program and this event in particular. A very warm thank you to Professor Vasuki Belavadi and the Center for Digital Learning, Training and Resources for helping with the webinar facilities and also for facilitating us to emerge a bit from the isolation. As you can see, the four of us from the Department of Political Science have found one opportunity to maintain some social distance, but yet sort of reduce some physical distance as well. I would also like to thank the head of the Political Science Department, Professor Housing, for his support. Also, all the colleagues from the School of Social Sciences, from various departments and centers who have been participating in this, the members of the school level coordination committee. The Department of Political Science is merely anchoring this program, but it is a program that the ownership is of the School of Social Sciences, and we are very thankful to all the colleagues who have been participating in this. And last but definitely not the least, one of our students from the Political Science Department, Rakshit, who has been very helpful in a lot of assistance for the background work and organizing of this program. With this, I thank everybody who took out their time to join us.
We'll come back at 12:05.
And right now it's 12 noon. We will sort of come back with the closed discussions of the preparatory webinar. And we will continue, but we have to go to a different link.
Yeah.
So, yeah. So all the colleagues from the School of Social Sciences who have registered and our resource persons, I now invite you all to please go to the other link that you must have received for the academic sessions. The title would be academic sessions, and we will move the discussion to that. Thank you very much.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah, please, we would now immediately shift there and see you all over there. Thank you.
Thank you.